Hey, this isn't going to be a perfect video, but I thought it was one that I should make. I'm going to be talking about the harm of believing the Bible, of believing every single word of this as it is written. And I have no problem with Christianity, specifically if you're using it to benefit yourself and you're not harming other people. A lot of people use the Bible as a way to get answers of what happens after they die, or why they're here on this earth, or even just a moral framework of what's good and bad, what's right and wrong. And I have no problem with that until those beliefs start harming other people. And in this video, I'm going to be giving you 10 examples or 10 ways that 100% true belief, faith in this text, this book of books, leads to harm. Personally, I didn't really care about the specifics of Christianity until I had a son. And when he was born, I kind of had a decision to make. I said, what are we going to be teaching him? If we're going to be teaching him something, specifically what's in this book, I want to know what's in it, every detail of it. So I started looking. And that brings us to number 1, which is child abuse. Proverbs 23:13 and 14 says, "Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. But if you strike him with a rod, you will save his soul from hell." So the literal reading of that verse says that I should beat my son with a rod to save his soul from hell, to teach him how to be good. That's not the only verse, though. Proverbs 13:24 says, "Whoever spares the rod hates his son." So this isn't just like a one-off thing. Like, it's repeated throughout the Bible. Now, the thing that obviously, beating your child with a rod is harming them. But the thing that my conscience had a disagreement with this is that, well, first of all, I've never spanked, and I will never spank. And the reason is because I don't see it being useful. Spanking is the diluted version of beating someone with a rod. So Christians have went from beating someone with a rod down to spanking. And better Christians don't spank. They use psychological discipline like timeouts or distractions. Either way, physical violence, whether that be spanking or beating with a rod or thumping them, is not a good way to teach. Because what it is teaching, at least this is how I have logically concluded it, is that you're teaching someone, your child, that it is a useful way to modify someone else's behavior by using physical violence, by beating them around. And I don't want to teach my child that, my children. I don't want to teach them physical violence is the answer to someone's bad behavior, whether that be their spouse in the future, whether that be me, or whether that be the dog running around. We don't correct behavior with this. There are better ways to do it. That's my belief. It's different from the belief in here. Number 2 is homophobia. So I'm just going to read some verses. Leviticus 20:13, "You shall not lie with a man as with a woman. It is an abomination." Genesis 2:24, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." So there's a bunch of other verses about homosexuality being an abomination, which basically means that it's wrong, it's sinful, and it shouldn't happen. And Paul, an author in the New Testament, talks about it an awful lot as well. And you may be going, where does the harm from this come from? Well, if someone is gay, and you think that being gay is wrong, you are going to treat them worse. And it's as simple as, here's an extreme example that I've commonly used. Let's say you meet a child molester out in public. Some of you watching this video might actually know a child molester. If you see them out in public, you're going to talk to them differently. You're going to treat them differently because you believed, whether you witnessed it or not, you believe that they molested a child, and because of that, you're going to treat them differently because you think that they've done something wrong. The same thing, the same thinking in Christianity is towards homosexuals. If you think that they're sinning, if you think that they're hurting God, or hurting themselves, you're going to treat them differently. A less extreme example is if you know that someone has lied to you, you kind of got this weird feeling inside, right? That you know they're lying to you. Maybe they don't know that you've caught them lying to you, but you know that they're lying to you. And because of that, you think they're doing something wrong, you're going to treat them differently. The same thing with homosexuality. If you believe it to be wrong, you're going to treat homosexuals or gay people worse. And I've seen this play out almost almost as a joke in Christian families, where they say that homosexuality is wrong, and they rebuke it, and they treat gay people wrong, until there's a family member in their family who is gay, and suddenly it's not that bad. We can forget about the verses about homosexuality. Well, if that's the case, I wish you had thought that way before you had a family member. I wish it didn't take the contradiction of loving a family member but hating gay people for you to not care about that verse as much. So that's number 2, homophobia. Number 3 is sexism. I've talked about this one before. I'm going to try to summarize it pretty quickly. 1 Corinthians 14:34 says, "Let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak." This is basically saying women can't talk in church. And there's Christians out there, specifically women, who say, that's not about me, that's about other women in another church who are causing outbursts. That's the, what do you call it? The apologetic for that, why women can speak in church. But the problem is the author of that text, Paul, keeps writing in other books, and he explains that it's not just a specific outburst of women. It's actually all women can't speak in church at any point in time. In 1 Timothy 2:11 through 14, Paul writes, he continues his sexism. "A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man." This is where Christians get the belief that women shouldn't be police officers, they shouldn't be professors, they shouldn't be judges, they shouldn't be presidents, because of this verse here. But Paul explains why he thinks this, if you keep reading that verse. "For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one that was deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner." Paul's theology here is that men are actually better than women, whether that be in their discernment or their moral value or for whatever reason. Men are better than women, and because of that, a woman cannot teach a man. And he uses the perfect example of the first time that a woman tried to teach a man, that she taught him to sin, to eat of the fruit. That's the story, right? So this whole theology that men have an inherent better value, better moral value, better discernment than women is not something that I'm going to be teaching my son or a daughter. So the first one was child abuse. The second one was homophobia. The third one is sexism. Number 4 is slavery. And this is as basic as treating people as property, treating people as things. So Leviticus 25:44 says, "Thus saith the Lord," and that's important, "as for your male and female slaves, whom you may have from the nations that are around you, from them you may buy male and female slaves. You may take them as an inheritance for your children. To inherit them as a possession, they shall be your permanent slaves." That was a pretty clear verse, saying you can own slaves, you should get them from other countries, and they can be permanent slaves. In fact, they're not even people anymore, they're property, because you can give them to your children. We can keep going. Leviticus 25:39 through 42. God specifically says in this verse that you can get slaves, you should get them from other countries, and you specifically can't get them from Israel. He says, "Because the Israelites are my servants who I brought out of Egypt, they must not be sold as slaves." This is where we start to kind of get into favoritism. Exodus 21:20 through 21 says, "And if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod," servant can be translated to slave pretty easily, "so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished." Which is good. If you kill a slave, you should be punished. It also says punished here, not an eye for an eye. It doesn't say that that slave owner should die. But it continues, "If the slave remains alive a day or two, the slave owner shall not be punished, because that slave is his property." This is pretty clear. Another human being can be property of another human being. And I've heard all the excuses. That's just recording history. No, it's not. That first verse I read said, "Thus saith the Lord," which is a commandment. I've heard the other excuse where God just had to meet them where they're at. Slavery was okay back then, and he wouldn't have been able to. That's an awful excuse as well. God said you can't eat shrimp. He could have also said humans can't own other humans as property. God, at some point in history, in this book, to some specific people, thought that it was okay for humans to be owned as things. To me, that's not right. That's not good, and I will not be teaching my children that. That's number 4, slavery. Also, to wrap that up, Jesus doesn't come along and say, actually, you can't own slaves. There's nothing in here that says you can't now own slaves. If it wasn't for the 13th Amendment, Christians could make the argument that they can own slaves as long as they're from other countries and they're not Israelites. Number 5 is the putting too much importance on prayer, basically. So I'm going to share a short little story. If you haven't heard this before, when I was a child, I was molested. Now, along with that came a lot of questioning, came a lot of prayer. I prayed for 15 years. Why did this happen to me? Why does this happen to anyone? Why was someone sexually interested in my body as a child? Did I do it? Was there something I did that caused this? For 15 years, I prayed prayers like that and received no answer. However, last year, I was 27 years old, I went to therapy. And in that one single therapy session, I got more relief, I got more of a palpable understanding of what happened to me and why it happened, and a more clear set of tools to deal with those feelings than I did from 15 years of praying. One session, 1 hour of therapy helped more than 15 years of praying. So that's kind of led me to this belief that prayer should be a last resort. You can apply this in any area of your life. Maybe there's a family member who's addicted. All right, let's get them to rehab first before we start praying for them. Let's not pray on it for 6 months and then send them to rehab. Maybe there's a case like me where someone was abused sexually or emotionally or mentally, physically maybe. They were beaten. Instead of praying for them to not continue receiving that or to deal with that better, let's get them to therapy. Maybe there's a cancer diagnosis in the family. Instead of praying for God to relieve that cancer, to get rid of it, let's get them immediate medical attention and the advice of doctors and the treatment that they advise. Prayer should come last, not first. The Bible says prayer should come first. A more practical application of this, and a less serious example, is a couple days ago I saw someone on the street corner and they were holding up a sign that said help. I could have helped them, like I did in the last 15 years, by praying that they get the help that they need. Instead of doing that, I went inside to a Steak and Shake, bought 2 burgers and some fries, and brought them to that person on the street. In that one example of actually doing something, I did more good than 15 years of praying for homeless people to get the help that they need. Number 5 is the over-importance of prayer. Prayer should be a last resort because there are many things you can do that are better than prayer to help the people in your life that you can physically see and help. Number 6 is exclusivism. So I'm going to share this story with you. We were in a Bible group, a Bible study group. There's probably 14 of us. It was a pretty big one, actually. There was a couple there that was explaining their frustration at some of their own family members being part of a religious community called the Seventh-day Adventist. And we listened to them share their frustration about how they weren't close to Jesus and they didn't know Jesus. I spoke up and I was like, what's a specific example of something they're doing wrong? And they said, well, and they came up with this example, which was, sometimes when we go over there, they don't have TVs. Like they believe TVs lead to corruption and are just bad influences. First of all, blew my mind. That doesn't seem like a bad thing. But they basically said that they didn't know Jesus and they were being deceived because they were Seventh-day Adventist. My wife and I left that group and we Googled what a Seventh-day Adventist was. And it was someone who believes the Bible plus something else. And this is where you get the idea of exclusivism. The whole basis of Christianity is I'm right and you're going to hell if you don't believe what I believe. Even if you believe this much the same and this little tiny bit is different. And so you can name any what are they called? Flavor of Christianity. Baptists believe Catholics are going to hell. Catholics believe Seventh-day Adventists are going to hell. And there's a whole spectrum, and they all believe mostly the same stuff. There's just a few differences. Like Mormonism, even if you look into Mormonism, they believe the Bible plus something else. Are they going to hell? How do you tell? Technically, Islam Muslim people believe in Jesus, the story of Jesus. And because there's not really a way to tell which one is true other than using faith, you really do have to say, I'm right, and if you don't believe what I'm right, you're going to hell. And I really can't get behind that exclusivity, that in-group and out-group bias, that I'm right and you're wrong. It's just really hard to teach that to children. Number 7 is family division, and this was just going to be a quick one. A lot of people don't know this, but Jesus did not come to bring peace. If you read Matthew 10:34 and 35, Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword." And if you read the same verse in Mark, a lot of these stories are the same throughout the Gospels. He says, "But division," to separate people. And if you keep reading, it says, and this is Jesus talking, "For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." So this is basically saying Jesus is admitting I came to tear families apart because this person follows me and this person doesn't. Actually, he doesn't say it's a second-order consequence of following him. He actually says, "For I have come to set a man against his father." And Christians, the application of this type of thinking is that if you think different, it's the same thing with the exclusive. If you think a little differently than me, I'm going to lean on that verse and say, Jesus predicted this. He predicted you would leave my family. Or if someone's a homosexual, instead of loving them for who they are, you can't be a homosexual or else you have to leave this house. I've heard Christians say that. The most important thing to me is my family. So number 7 is family division. Jesus actually saying he came to divide families. Number 8 is just the general inequality of people. I have a fundamental belief that no human is better or worse than another human. If you believe this word for word, God doesn't believe that. The Bible talks about God's favorite people, the Israelites, right? God favored them more than other people. And that's okay to think about it as a fact of history. But that actually continues to go forward as Christianity continues to be a thing in 2025. I'll give you, and it's not just like Old Testament either. This is the second thing that I don't really like one of the things that Jesus said. So Mark 7:25-29 shares this story of, I'll just read it. "A woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia." She was a Syro-Phoenician woman. First of all, why is that in there? Why does it matter where she came from? I'll tell you why. I'm about to get there. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. This is what Jesus said. "First, let the children eat all they want. It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." Jesus calls this woman who is begging her a dog and isn't casting the demon out. This woman comes back with a pretty witty reply. She says, "Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And then Jesus, outwitted, says, "For such a reply you may go, the demon has left your daughter." I don't know if this story is true or not, but what this story means is that Jesus didn't come for everyone, and he didn't come to help everyone. He came to help the Israelites. As he says, doesn't say dog, he says the children, which are the people that, the Jews at the time, I believe. A lot of inequality through all the pages in here. God's favorite people, Jesus, I believe that this was a racist verse. If this woman wasn't Greek, if she wasn't born in Syria, it doesn't say that she didn't believe in Jesus. It says where she was born. And because of where she was born, Jesus treated her differently. That's the definition of racism. Number 9 is that there is also a lot of fear in Christianity. So Ezekiel 5:9-10 shares a promise that God makes of something that he does once and will never do again. By the way, God's done this before with the flood, right? God flooded humanity because of how wicked it was. He drowned everyone except for 8 people. And he said he will never do it again, so he makes the rainbow. There is another thing that God does once, and he says he will never do again, and it's in Ezekiel 5:9-10. This is what the verse says. Because of all of your detestable idols, I will do to you what I have never done before and will never do again. Therefore, in your midst, parents will eat their children, and children will eat their parents. It continues and basically gives evidence that this isn't just something that God is letting happen. This is something God is making happen. He's making parents eat their children, and children eat their parents, which is abhorrent, which is evil. In fact, if I gave you that verse and you didn't know where that come from, if I had started that verse by saying Satan said this, you in your midst, parents will eat their children and children will eat their parents, you would have believed me, because that's something that Satan would have done. And so along with all of this fear, there's also a lot of contradictions. God's just, but he's also merciful. Well, how can he be? Justice is giving someone what they deserve. Merciful is not giving someone what they deserve. How can he be just and merciful? God loves you, but if you don't follow him, he's going to punish you harshly. And the idea is eternal conscious torment, right? If you don't follow God, by the time you die, you will be eternally tormented. The verse I just read actually wasn't even when these people were in hell. It was just on earth. They were eating their parents, and parents were eating their children. My whole point of this is that number 9 is fear. It's a lot of fear-based stuff. I'm sure that when Ezekiel wrote this, he may have truly believed that God told him to say, in your midst, parents will eat their children and children will eat their parents. But it definitely was fear-based. It wasn't come to God and see all the blessings he will give you. You have worshipped idols, therefore you shall eat children. Awful. Number 9 is fear. Number 10 is apocalyptic beliefs. So, nobody has ever put this into such simple wording, but I'm about to share it with you. Christians live in fear that the world itself is bad. Christians believe that the world is bad, right? This is worldly stuff. We're not supposed to worship it because it's bad. And not only that is it bad, it's getting worse. Every day, we're straying further from God until it reaches a certain point where the world will end. So Christians think the world is bad, it's getting worse, and it's going to end. And what does that lead to? What kind of thinking does that apocalyptic thinking lead to? Well, it definitely doesn't lead to improving the earth, wondering about climate change. Well, what will the world look like in 100 years? No. Paul, in 1 Corinthians 7:29, actually thought the world was going to end so soon you should leave your marriage. 1 Corinthians 7:29, this is Paul writing. What I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they do not. I've never had a good explanation of what that actually means, what Paul meant by that about living as if you didn't have a wife. My best explanation is that Paul actually thought that the world was going to end in 3 days, and so you should leave everything, including your wife, and try to spread the gospel. That's the best explanation that I can come up with. But it's still weird that Paul would say that if you have a wife, you should live as if they don't exist. That's really odd to me. It's an apocalyptic belief because Paul thought the world was going to end soon. And so if you're a Christian and you really believe that the world is ending soon, when I ask you, how many people did you talk to in 2024 about your faith, about Christianity? If you truly believe that the world is getting worse and is going to end, and you love those people and you want to save them, the answer to that question, to how many people did you talk to in 2024, shouldn't be this number. It shouldn't even be maybe 3 people. If I count them up, maybe I talked to them. It should be over 1,000. If you love those people and you truly believe they're going to go to hell and you believe that the world is going to end soon, you better be talking to people about it. But you don't. It's more comfortable just to believe the verses that you want to believe. It's more comfortable to think of this as just a moral framework and not an apocalyptic literature. Wrapping this video up, which has been a pretty long video actually, I'll summarize the harmful things of believing this. The first one is child abuse. We went over the verses in Proverbs about beating a child with a rod. The second one is homophobia, actually harming gay people, or allowing them to harm themselves through guilt and shame. The third one is sexism, thinking that men are actually better than women. The fourth one is slavery. At any point in time, that slavery was okay. Harmful. The fifth one is an overcorrection of prayer. Prayer shouldn't be the first thing, to me, that you do. Prayer should be the last thing. When there's nothing else to do, then you pray. Number 6 is the exclusivism of Christianity. The general belief that I'm right, you're wrong, you're going to hell because of it, and I have to convince you. It's my job to convince you otherwise. 7 is the affordance of family division. The actual, hey, Jesus came to divide families. There was a verse in there I didn't mention, which is Jesus basically says, you have to hate your family and even yourself to follow me. Not a big fan of that one. Number 8 is inequality. God's chosen people, God's favorite people, right? And the Syrophoenician woman, she was born in a different place, and because she was born in a different place, she was treated differently. Number 9 is fear. And number 10 is apocalyptic beliefs, which, in general, apocalyptic thinking doesn't lead to try to improve the world. These are harmful things that come out of this. I've been thinking about this a lot. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. But I'm tired of the harm that comes out of this. I don't know, something to think about. Love you guys.